Hey there, friends. David Torch. Whoa. I do have a hot theory for you today, but yes, I'm here with some Winds of Winter. It's crazy. Winds of Winter predictions. We're leaving this in. We're just working with it for Jon Connington and also all of King's Landing. Not the good kind of prediction. Alrighty. Let's also get this Gatorade out of the shot. Oh, now we're medieval times. Okay. It's not hard to see what's going on here. It's not hard to see that Jon Connington is a ticking time bomb of rage and Greyscale, more importantly, Greyscale. And it's not hard to see that he is keen to commit some war crimes just as soon as he has the chance. Hashtag, what would Tywin do? Oh no, that's the wrong wristband. That's not the one we want. But what people in the story can't see, we can see it, but the people in the story, what they don't see are the blackened, stony Greyscale fingers that this patient zero is hiding beneath his glove. So the serious question for we readers has always been, what is George Martin planning to do with this Greyscale epidemic that Jon Con is incubating and carrying around Westeros? Well, friends, I've cracked the code. I'm pretty sure I have cracked the code. And I think I know exactly how Jon Connington is going to spread Greyscale to a lot of the people in King's Landing, a lot. And I also know how Jon Connington is going to die and who's going to kill him. And the answer will surprise you. I promise you it will. So grab yourself a cup of clean, purified drinking water. Thank God for clean drinking water, it's really important. As the intro music plays, and do click that thumbs up button as well, and we'll get into the very overdue demise of jilted Rhaegar admirer turned unwitting Blackfire Rebellion patsy turned Greyscale super spreader, Jon Connington. And you could even call him Green Garen's patsy, since he is, carrying Garen's curse to the city built by some of the last Valyrians alive, King's Landing. And we'll talk about that as well. Seriously though, there are just no redeeming qualities to this guy. I mean, what, does he think Rhaegar Targaryen is gonna come back from the dead and give him a big wet sloppy kiss if he can seat his son on the Iron Throne? I mean, look, buddy, Rhaegar needed your help 17 years ago at the Battle of the Bells when you were not defeating Robert Baratheon. So anyway, start the video. Now, as many people in the fandom have theorized, and as viewers of this channel will know, Rhaegar Targaryen did not die at the Battle of the Trident, but rather fled the war, his new family with Lyanna Stark, and his old family with Elia Martell, and now crashes here on my couch, luxuriating in the warm, steamy comfort of Manta Sleep's steam eye cups. As you can see, he couldn't have a care in the world, because the Manta Steam eye cups are filled with zeolite beads that absorb moisture from the air and release clean, 100% natural steam when microwaved. Steam gently unclogs your tear glands to lubricate your eyes for immediate, long-lasting dry eye relief, providing hours of comfort for dry eyes. That's why doctors recommend steamy heat to unblock eyelid glands and reverse dry eye symptoms. There really is nothing better after a few hours of staring at a computer screen, as I am wont to do. I'm not sure what Rhaegar's excuse is. I mean, he doesn't really have a job. He's basically freeloading on my couch here, as if the mere delight of his company suffices for rent payments.
Dave, you do know that I can hear all of this, right?
Oh, wow. This is awkward.
Well, you were right about Jon Connington, though. That guy let me down big time. I mean, what a loser. I'm glad someone finally said it.
Well, I appreciate that. And folks, if you want to relax like Rhaegar and myself and get 10% off a Manta Sleep steam mask or any of their other amazing sleep masks, just follow the link in the description and use the code DAVID. And now back to Jon Connington, patient zero.
Jon Connington, patient what now?
All right, the friend zone. So this theory, it starts with a parallel between The Mystery Knight, the third Duncan Egg novella, which contains the events labeled as the Second Blackfire Rebellion, although everyone agrees it wasn't much of a rebellion so much as it was a bumbling traitor's tourney for John the Fiddler and his merry band of Blackfire Pretender supporters. So John the Fiddler, one of my favorite characters, honestly. His real name is Daemon Blackfire II, and he has very obvious parallels to young Griff, aka Fagon Blackfire. Both are quintessentially Targaryen-looking teenaged Blackfire heirs disguised with fake names and dark hair dye. Blue hair dye for Fagon, of course, and black hair dye for Daemon the Fiddler. We'll call him although he also does hide under a blue sigil and wears a bunch of blue clothing. So both Fagon and Damon the Fiddler cross the narrow sea to launch their own rebellions. That's the major parallel. And both of those rebellions are orchestrated by some very similar archetypal characters. Seriously though, they both dye their hair. They're both Blackfire pretender teen heartthrobs of a similar age, so it's pretty hard to miss parallelism. And God help you today if you're planning on playing a drinking game using the word parallel or parallelism. I don't recommend that. So as you may recall, one of Jon the Fiddler's key advisors in the rebellion is a grumpy, vengeful lord named Alan Cockshaw, the cock of the walk over at House Cockshaw, which is somewhere in the Reach. And as you definitely remember, one of Fagon's advisors is a grumpy, vengeful lord named Jon Connington, former head Griffin at Griffin's Roost. So the big parallel between Alan Cockshaw and Jon Connington is this. They're both foul-tempered, jilted, would-be lovers of Targaryen princes who are currently managing a Blackfire rebellion invasion of Westeros for a Blackfire prince in disguise. So Jon Connington, as we all know, he carries around the torch, the old torch of his unrequited love for Rhaegar, of course, who was supposed to be Fagon's father. That's how Varys and Illyrio suckered Jon Connington into pretending that he drank himself to death and now essentially raising somebody else's, Illyrio's son, as Rhaegar's son. It's pretty twisted. While Alan Cockshaw has unrequited love for Jon the Fiddler, for Daemon Blackfire II, which is why Alan Cockshaw tries to kill Dunk when he sees Daemon flirting with Dunk, although Dunk doesn't see that. But yes, Alan does. And, all throughout the novels, Daemon the Fiddler is taking a keen interest in Dunk. And so Alan is the one who tried to pay Sir Uthor Underleaf to kill Dunk, and then later, he tries to push Dunk down the well by drawing a knife on him. So as Alan is trying to push Dunk down the well, he is confessing all of this. He says, "This is about the dragon. Did you think I would stand by and let you steal him?" He also says, "Daemon's mine. I will command his Kingsguard. You are not worthy of a white cloak." And then he says of Daemon, "I wept when Bittersteel carried him off to exile, and again when Lord Peake told me he was coming home. But then he saw you upon the road and forgot that I existed." Meanwhile, Jon Connington's hopeless romantic quote about Rhaegar is a lot more poetic and more famous. "I rose too high, loved too hard, dared too much. I tried to grasp a star, overreached and fell." And then JonCon also speaks of his failure to slay Robert at Stony Sept, which is where the Battle of the Bells happened, as the bells tolling for those he loved and fought for, saying, "The bells tolled for all of us that day, for Aerys and his queen, for Elia of Dorne and her little daughter, for every true man and honest woman in the Seven Kingdoms, and for my silver prince." Accordingly, Jon the Fiddler and Rhaegar, the objects of desire for Alan and JonCon, they also have parallels. So Jon the Fiddler with his golden fiddle sigil, and Rhaegar the Harpist with his silver harp. And Rhaegar named his son Jon, which is Daemon Blackfire II's fake name. Rhaegar and Jon the Fiddler, aka Daemon Blackfire, are also both dragon dreamers who are more than a little too confident in their ability to set the world to rights. So to sum up, just as young Daemon Blackfire II landed in Westeros with dyed hair, a fake name, and too much confidence, Fagon Blackfire has now landed in Westeros with dyed hair, a fake name, and too much confidence. Alan Cockshaw, the grumpy, jilted, would-be lover, is helping guide Daemon's rebellion, and JonCon, the grumpy, jilted, would-be lover, is now helping to guide Fagon's invasion. So you see how this works. And now that you do, let's take a look at the scene where Alan Cockshaw meets his demise, which again happens as he's trying to force Dunk down into the well with a drawn dagger. Dunk closed his hand around the loose stone. It proved to be less loose than he had hoped. Before he could wrench it free, Sir Alan lunged. Dunk twisted sideways, so the point of the blade sliced through the meat of his shield arm. And then the stone popped free. Dunk fed it to his lordship and felt his teeth crack beneath the blow. "The well, is it?" He hit the lordling in the mouth again, then dropped the stone, seized Cockshaw by the wrist, and twisted until a bone snapped and the dagger clattered to the stones. "After you, my lord!" Sidestepping, Dunk yanked at the lordling's arm and planted a kick in the small of his back. Lord Alan toppled headlong into the well. There was a splash. All right, so let's break it down. Again, thinking of Alan as a parallel to Jon Con, and we see that Dunk feeds Alan the stone, just as Jon Connington has ingested the Greyscale disease. You are what you eat, of course, and so this is symbolism designed to make Alan an honorary stone man as he's being thrown down the well. And then, just as Jon Con has the deadly disease in his hand, Dunk just broke Sir Alan's wrist, which gives him a dead hand. Now, when we ask ourselves, what's the best way for one Greyscale carrier to rapidly infect, I don't know, hundreds of people in King's Landing? Throwing Jon Con down a well to poison the city's water supply is a terrific answer. And not terrific as in terrific, but you get the point. This would be Jon Con's true patient zero moment. So that's a pretty cool theory, and there's a lot more evidence for it. That well is far from dry. It's worse. It's infected with Greyscale. Don't drink from it. All right, the Black Water. So as we reviewed in our recent Septon Barth live stream, Septon Barth in the Making of Westeros, thanks for watching, the people of King's Landing used to have only the Blackwater Rush River to drink from. And apparently that's pretty dicey without some water purification. And so that's why Septon Barth and Queen Alysanne convinced Jaehaerys to spend a bunch of money on a system-wide city of clean, accessible drinking water, as we learn in Fire and Blood. To address the problem, Barth proposed sinking wells, some inside the city proper and others to the north, beyond the walls. A series of glazed clay pipes and tunnels would carry the fresh water into the city, where it would be stored in 4 huge cisterns and made available to the small folk from public fountains in certain squares and crossroads. In other words, be a real shame if something happened to all that fine drinking water you got there, wouldn't it? And it's not just Alan Cockshaw going down the well at White Walls that foreshadows this. It's also the Dragon's Egg, which is a stone with scales, pretty similar to a Greyscale stone person. And this Dragon's Egg, of course, goes down the privy shaft at Castle White Walls when Bloodraven's troop of comic dwarves / spies smuggle it down the privy shaft. The privy shaft, in turn, is kind of like a foul, polluted well. It's a stone shaft and there's water at the bottom. And of course, poop water is called black water, like the Blackwater Rush that flows into King's Landing that the people used to have to drink from. So just like the privy shaft, the wells of King's Landing will soon be polluted when Jon Con falls in and befouls them. Now, thinking about the Dragon's Egg a little further as a symbol, it's kind of like a stone seed, and Jon Con's scaly corpse will be like a stone seed from which an epidemic is grown. And when it goes down, it's going to be shitty. And one might think of the House of the Undying vision of Jon Con as a stone beast breathing shadow fire, meaning breathing a new Blackfire rebellion. He's a stone beast, which would hatch from a stone egg. So it's a pretty good parallel. And in addition to Dunk throwing Lord Alan down the well and the Dragon's Egg going down the privy shaft, Dunk also thinks about wanting to throw a very young and annoying Walder Frey, yes, that Walder Frey, down a well as well, and this happens a little earlier in the story. His melancholy ponderings were rudely interrupted when a troop of painted dwarves came bursting from the belly of a wheeled wooden pig to chase Lord Butterwell's fool about the tables, walloping him with inflated pig's bladders that made rude noises every time a blow was struck. It was the funniest thing Dunk had seen in years, and he laughed with all the rest. Lord Frey's son was so taken by their antics that he joined in, pummeling the wedding guests with a bladder borrowed from a dwarf. The child had the most irritating laugh that Dunk had ever heard, a high, shrill hiccup of a laugh that made him want to take the boy over a knee or throw him down a well. If he hits me with the bladder, I may do it. So this is all very funny because, comic dwarves, but there's young Walder Frey. His annoying laugh is already manifesting. And if only Dunk had thrown him down the well, we wouldn't have had the Red Wedding and much other trouble besides. And more importantly, this is a preview for Dunk getting hit with Sir Alan's dagger and then throwing him down the well. Here he thinks to himself, if he hits me with the bladder, I may throw him down the well. And again, road's not taken. But most importantly of all, for our purposes today, the idea of throwing Walder down a well foreshadows Jon Con suffering the same fate. To wit, Walder Frey is a man who lives on a stone bridge, and the Greyscale victims that infected Jon Connington live on a stone bridge. Walder Frey loves to throw people into the river after he's killed them. People like Lady Catelyn Tully, who turns into Lady Stoneheart after being pulled from the river as if she had Greyscale. And that's paralleled by the Stone Men trying to drown people in the river while giving them Greyscale. Even House Frey's favorite little game, Lord of the Crossing, the Lord of the Crossing game, it's based on knocking people into the water. And so you could say that the Stone Men on the Bridge of Dream are just playing a really messed up game of Lord of the Crossing. So yes, throwing Waldo down a well is a lot like throwing a stone man down a well. And so these are all in the same novella, mind you, The Mystery Knight, so it seems clear that foreshadowing Jon Connington's Greyscale Epidemic at King's Landing was on George's mind as he wrote this. And it was also on his mind when he came up with Jon Connington's backstory about losing to Robert Baratheon at the Battle of the Bells, so let's talk about that. The bells are getting louder. What? The bells are getting louder. Shout out if you know that one. But yes, let's talk about the Battle of the Bells, which, like I said earlier, took place at a good-sized town in the Riverlands called Stony Sept. And here's what Jon Connington did when he found out that Robert Baratheon was hiding in the town. And so he swept down on Stony Sept, closed off the town, and began a search. In other words, Jon Connington placed a quarantine on the town of Stony Sept. What, is there an unholy plague of stone men breaking out that we need a quarantine? Will King's Landing be quarantined after Jon Connington spreads his Greyscale disease and turns it into a stony town? Take me down to Stony Town, Planky Town, Funky Town. Anyway, I don't want to go to Stony Town, not that Stony Town. Of course, when Jon Connington later remarks to former Golden Company commander Sir Miles Toyne, also called Blackheart, that Tywin Lannister himself could have done no more, Toyne corrects him. "There's where you're wrong," Miles Toyne had replied. "Lord Tywin would not have bothered with the search. He would have burned that town and every living creature in it. Men and boys, babes at the breast, noble knights and holy septons, pigs and whores, rats and rebels, he would have burned them all. When the fires guttered out and only ash and cinders remained, he would have sent his men in to find the bones of Robert Baratheon." Gosh, I hope King's Landing doesn't get set on fire or anything while everyone is trapped inside under a quarantine. I mean, that would be terrible. If someone triggered one of the wildfire caches on purpose, well, then that would be a war crime. The exact war crime that many of us think JonCon is being set up to commit. So many people think that oh so disappointing part of the ending of the Game of Thrones show where Dany hears the bells and seems to kind of lose her mind and then starts burning innocent civilians with fire. Well, a lot of people think that this may be something that George mentioned to Dave and Dan that Jon Connington was going to do. He's the one who was nearly driven insane by the ringing of the bells at Stony Sept as he was failing to find Robert, and he's still hearing those bells in his nightmares. So that would make more sense. And he is just marinating on this failure for these past 17 years. And so last time, he didn't burn down Stony Sept for fear of causing too many civilian casualties. But this time, he's determined not to make the same mistake, as it were. Hashtag what would Tywin do? Hashtag oops all war crimes. Yeah. So given that the name of the town where all this quarantining and hypothetical burning is taking place is Stony Sept, and given that I do think there is a lot of foreshadowing that the Sept of Baelor is going to get burned down or exploded in fire like on the show, one has to wonder, will JonCon be the one who burns down / blows up the Sept of Baelor in order to get one of his enemies, like perhaps Cersei? So this isn't the main theory that I'm trying to address today. Who will burn down King's Landing, or how many different people will be involved in the burning down of King's Landing? But it could happen this way, with JonCon being the one who burns the Sept of Baelor. And by the way, let me know if you want a video. Who's going to burn the Sept of Baelor? It could be JonCon. It could be Cersei herself, like on the show. It could be Dany on a dragon by accident, or Tyrion on a dragon on purpose. But it is going to burn. And honestly, I think the whole reason that George Martin is bringing Greyscale to King's Landing is essentially to create a more chaotic situation that the quarantine would bring. It's going to ratchet up the intensity. No one can leave. People are starting to go insane. And so it's very interesting that at Stony Sept, we have Jon Connington creating a quarantine and regretting that he didn't burn the entire Stony town down to the ground. But that's still not all the proof that we have for this theory, and we do still need to figure out who is going to play the dunk role and throw this Griffin down the well. All right, let's talk about the wells by the White Walls. The White Walls wells. So, as many of you will know, Dunk throwing Lord Alan Cockshaw down a well at White Walls after feeding him a stone also draws a very strong parallel to the scene at the Night Fort with Bran and Hodor, where Dunk's descendant Hodor throws a stone down the well before climbing down himself, like Alan Cockshaw was trying to make Dunk do. Now, Hodor throwing a stone down the well is obviously a call out to Lord of the Rings, and whichever one of the hobbits it was, I forget, let me know in the comments, who threw the stone down the well in the mines of Moria and awakened the Balrog. But the point for today is that it's this same theme of throwing a stone thing down a well, with Hodor playing the role of Dunk, who is his ancestor. Dunk's well scene takes place at Castle White Walls, and the Night Fort is a castle, say it with me, attached to a big white wall. Bran's scene at the Night Fort obviously has strong Greenseer components, with the Night Fort's twisted weirwood seeming to strain up to pull the moon itself down into the well as Bran thinks to himself that the old gods are watching. And then back over at Castle White Walls, we find the old gods watching as well at the well. And this is picking the scene up right where we left off with Dunk having just heard the splash of Sir Alan Cockshaw at the bottom of the well. Through the rain, all he could make out was a hooded shape and a single pale white eye. It was only when the man came forward that the shadowed face beneath the cowl took on the familiar features of Sir Maynard Plum, the pale eye no more than the moonstone brooch that pinned his cloak at the shoulder. Alright, so like I said, we've got the old gods watching, just like at the Night Fort, and there's also a stone moon that looks like an eye, just like at the Night Fort. And just as it is Bloodraven who causes the dragon's egg at White Walls to go down the privy shaft, the weirwood tree at the Night Fort is trying to pull the moon down the well. And of course, the moon is like a dragon's egg in that Carthian Origin of Dragons legend, where the moon was like an egg that hatched dragons. Now, Martin, again, as many of you will know, is actually creating all of this from the story of Odin casting his own eye into the well of Mimir. But that's not really important for today. That's mostly for Bran's story. For today, the point is to point out that Bloodraven is the Odin figure, and that implies his moonstone eye being thrown down into the well, which is a match for the Night Fort scene where the weirwood tree is trying to pull the moon down into the well. And then final point about the Night Fort, Hodor's real name is Walder, as in Walder Frey, whom Dunk also wanted to throw down the well at White Walls. Now that Walder Frey parallel is pretty important, with the twins serving as a symbolic parallel to the Night Fort as this all-important crossing point. These things lead to my theory that the door that Hodor will hold is actually the Black Gate at the Night Fort. So Walder Hodor is going to be the Lord of the Crossing at the wall door, the door in the wall, the Black Gate. And it also leads to the theory about the Skagosi under the command of Rickon being the ones to topple and take revenge on the Freys, and that Walder Frey himself is going to get thrown in the river. It's kind of like Billy Goat's Gruff. Honestly, Tim cooked hard on this one, and you can find out more about that in this video. For now, the point is that the JonCon down the well scene that is to come in the Winds of Winter will be just another iteration, essentially, of this pattern that Martin has already developed. Hodor is playing the Dunk role at the Night Fort of being the one to throw stone things down the well, so when we think about who will throw stone JonCon down the well, it should probably be a Dunk-like person, someone who's archetypally similar to Dunk, or perhaps even a descendant of Dunk, since there are a bunch of those around. So as I was thinking about this, of course, I thought of Brienne of Tarth, but she's pretty far away up in the Riverlands, and she's a little caught up in the whole affairs of Jaime and Lady Stoneheart, and I'm not sure that she could even get to King's Landing in time, or that she's even going to go back to King's Landing at all. Now, Sandor Clegane is a Dunk descendant. He's on the Quiet Isle, which is a little bit closer to King's Landing, and some people obviously do think he's going to come back to King's Landing in time for Clegane Bowl, meaning he's going to represent the faith in Cersei's trial by combat against his brother Gregor, who is now some sort of undead Frankenstein monster, obviously. So this one has a little more potential, but the big problem with this is that Sandor has no real emotional or plot-based connection to JonCon and Fagon. I don't even think he knows they exist, to be honest. And so I'm not sure how much sense that would make. So at this point in the brainstorming process for this video, I'm seeing that we're kind of all out of Dunk descendants to do the deed. And so I thought, what about someone who is merely like Dunk in a sort of archetypal way? Someone like Duck, Fagon's first choice for Kingsguard, who actually has endless parallels to Dunk. Duck and Dunk, oh yes. And so let's go on to the next section. All right, Duckin and Dunkin, bobbin and weavin', Duck and Dunk. So yeah, the parallels between Dunk and Egg and Duck and Fagon are numerous and extensive. And both pairings are actually part of a larger pattern of a little dude and a giant sidekick that also includes Hodor and Bran, Brienne and Pod Payne, as well as Sandor and Arya. And of course, Hodor, Brienne, and Sandor are all Dunk descendants. So yeah, what can I say? George Martin likes parallelism, which is again why you should not use that as your word for your drinking game. And by the way, if I sound a little stuffy, I am so sorry. Pollen season has kicked in with a vengeance. I thought about taking all of spring off for making YouTube videos, but that didn't seem feasible. So I'm doing my best. Anyway, let's run through these parallels as quick as we can. So Dunk and Duck, they're obviously both huge and strong. A little bit simple, not. I mean, don't tell them I said that, but you know what I'm saying. And they're also both, most importantly, very honest and honorable. Both of them come from nothing, essentially, and have to choose their own knightly title. Duck famously looked up when he was being knighted and saw ducks in a field, and so took the last name Duckfield. And Dunk, of course, needed to come up with a knightly title to enter the tourney at Ashford Meadow, and came up with Sir Duncan the Tall. Fagon chooses Duck for his Kingsguard because he trusts him and can count on him always, and that one imagines those are the same reasons why Egg chose Dunk for his Kingsguard when he became king. And who was it that pushed back against Fagon's choice of Duck for the Kingsguard? That's right, you guessed it. A solid man and true, Connington thought as he watched Duck dismount, but not worthy of the Kingsguard. He had tried his best to dissuade the prince from giving Duckfield that cloak, pointing out that the honor might best be held in reserve for warriors of greater renown, whose fealty would add luster to their cause, and the younger sons of great lords, whose support they would need in the coming struggle. But the boy would not be moved. Duck will die for me if need be, he had said, and that's all I require in my Kingsguard. The Kingslayer was a warrior of great renown, and the son of a great lord as well. At least I convinced him to leave the other 6 slots open. Else Duck might have 6 ducklings trailing after him, each more blindingly adequate than the last. And so there's your setup. Duck is loyal to Fagon, not Jon Connington. And Jon Connington thinks Duck doesn't deserve the white cloak that he wears. And we can also see there's a developing rift between what JonCon thinks we should do and what Fagon thinks we should do. And you might also notice that JonCon still thinks about Fagon as the boy, whereas Fagon is starting to think about himself as the king. In other words, if there is some sort of conflict between Fagon and JonCon, we don't have to even ask where Duck's loyalties lie. And if Duck were to discover that JonCon has done something dishonorable or contrary to Fagon's wishes, perhaps involving war crimes, perhaps at the Sept of Baelor, then Duck could turn on Connington completely and throw him down a well, as Dunk did to Alan Cockshaw. Unfortunately, Duck probably will have no idea about JonCon's patient zero status, and thus no idea of the consequences his throwing the stone down a well will bring. Much like the hobbits at Moria, to be honest, who had no idea they would awaken the Balrog. Arr, curses be, matey. Yeah, so I just mentioned the dropped stone in the mines of Moria that awakened the ancient evil known as the Balrog. Shout out to Jon Connington, the stone beast breathing shadow fire. And along the same lines, recall that Greyscale is indeed a curse called down by the Rhoynish prince Garin the Great against the Valyrians. And so this is the tale of the demise of the Rhoynar and Garin the Great as told by Rhoynar descendant Ysilla of the Shy Maid. The men of Volantis and Valyria hung Garin in a golden cage and made mock as he called upon his mother to destroy them. But in the night the waters rose and drowned them, and from that day to this they have not rested. They are down there still beneath the water, They who were once the lords of fire, their cold breath rises from the murk to make these fogs, and their flesh has turned as stony as their hearts. So you see what I mean about Lady Stoneheart being some sort of intentional grayscale parallel having been pulled from the river. And you can see here that the original Greyscale's super spreaders are indeed in the river, under the water, just like JonCon will be. And by bringing Green Garen's curse to King's Landing, well, really, at this point, it's going to seem like the curse is following the Valyrians around the world, which is probably part of the point. Striking at the city built by Aegon the Conqueror, whom most people would say is the greatest Valyrian to have lived since the Doom. Even more specifically, it's going to seem like the curse is following Fagon around the world at that point. And big shout out to Indeep Geek and his video about the Sorrows, because he does seem to have cracked the code on this one. So surely you remember how the Shy Maid with, Fagon and Tyrion and JonCon on board, it ends up going under the Bridge of Dream twice. The first time it goes through, there's no problems, and then some sort of time and space loop happens, and they end up getting fed back to the bridge again, only this time the Stone Men are all pissed and they attack. So first of all, this is all happening at the Sorrows, which is just the modern name for Croyane, the festival city, which is where Green Garen was hung from a cage and where he called down the curse that became Greyscale. So this is basically the epicenter for all this Greyscale stuff. And what Indeep Geek brilliantly realized is that right after passing under the Bridge of Dream the first time is when Tyrion starts to put together, or when he does put together, that young Griff, quote unquote, is actually Rhaegar's son, quote unquote, and a Valyrian. It's only right after Tyrion says this out loud, and after Fagon acknowledges and says to Griff, hey, he knows who I am, that the time loop begins, and they begin to see the repetitive landmarks and are, again, fed back to the stone bridge with a bunch of pissed off stone men who, having been activated by the presence of a Valyrian, are now attacking. And it does seem like, if you go back and reread the passage, that they are going for Fagon. So that's very cool. It's Green Garen's curse being activated, and it's a very satisfying answer to what has always been a very perplexing mystery. And so again, if JonCon unleashes Garen's curse on King's Landing, just as Fagon is coming to rule it as king, we really would have to see that as the long arm of Garen's curse reaching out to finish the job that it could not finish on the Rhoyne River. Fagon and the Shy Maid escaped the Stone Men that time, but the curse essentially stowed away on board by infecting JonCon, and now it's poised to strike. Alright, so we're basically done with the theory. I think it's complete as is, but there are a couple of other parallels that I found that I wanted to show you, one of which concerns Ice and Fire Griffin mythology. And I also wanted to clarify that there are two diseases in Ice and Fire. One's called Greyscale and one is called Grey Plague. So the Grey Plague is the more virulent form, essentially. It's the same as Greyscale, but it infects much more rapidly and spreads much more rapidly, like a plague. We know that they are essentially different forms of the same disease because people who have had Greyscale and survived, like say Shireen, they are immune to the Grey Plague. Kind of like having chickenpox once makes you immune to ever catching it again. So one thing I'm wondering is if putting a Greyscale person in a water supply is going to mutate the disease and essentially spread Grey Plague in King's Landing. That seems like more what George Martin would be going for if he wants a chaotic scene and a quarantine and all that. So that's one little extra tidbit. And then while I was writing the script for the last video, The True History of the First Men, thanks for watching everyone, I accidentally found another correlation to the idea that it's going to be Raleigh Duckfield who throws JonCon down the well. So I had just been thinking about all that when I switched over to working on the First Man script, and I was at the point where I was talking about the history of the Vale pertaining to the Winged Knight, who is their oldest folk hero. He supposedly rode on the back of a giant falcon and flew up to the top of the Giant's Lance to slay the Griffin King, who was the top bird skin changer or whatever at that time. And it occurred to me, Raleigh Duckfield is a winged knight because he's Sir Duck. And Jon Connington obviously is the Griffin. So this seems like a parallel, and when the Griffin King is slain in an aerial battle over the Giant's Lance, presumably he's then going to fall down the Giant's Lance. And that's similar to the idea of JonCon the Griffin being slain by Duck the Winged Knight, and then falling down a stone well. Now, there's a little something from the Elaine Stone Winds of Winter early release chapter that encourages us to think about Raleigh Duckfield as a winged knight. And that's the fact that Sweet Robin is now creating his own pseudo-Kingsguard, and he's calling them the Winged Knights. Ergo, George writing in The World of Ice and Fire that the Winged Knight slew the Griffin King really does seem like yet another intentional foreshadowing that Raleigh Duckfield of the Kingsguard is a winged knight who will slay the Griffin Jon Connington. And then the last little thing that I got for you before we get out of here, it's a loose parallel, but it is interesting, and it involves Jaime and Brienne and Red Ronnet Connington. This is that scene at Harrenhal, I believe it's in A Dance with Dragons, where Jaime smacks Ronnet upside the mouth with his golden hand for failing to speak of Lady Brienne of Tarth with sufficient respect. They're standing by the bear pit as they talk, which serves in place of a well. And of course, Brienne would be the Dunk descendant in this version of the scene, like Hodor at the Night Fort. And she's the one who ended up in the pit with Jaime, who is a Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, just like Dunk, leaping in to save her. So here in A Dance with the Dragons, Jaime and Red Ronnet are standing at the bear pit and talking about this event, and Jaime feeds Red Ronnet not a stone, but a metal hand. And of course, JonCon's hand is turning to stone, so it's not a precise parallel, but enough of the elements are there, albeit shuffled around a bit, that I wanted to mention it. Mainly because it's a Connington in the Alan Cockshaw role, which is what I think will happen in King's Landing with Jon Connington. All right, folks, thanks very much for watching my video. As always, I do appreciate it. And let me know in the comments if you have found any other clues that Jon Connington will be some sort of super spreader of Greyscale in King's Landing. And let me know who you think is going to blow up Deceptive Baelor. And with that said, I'll see you every Sunday with a fun live stream.